bajo el resplandor de una celebración que prometía gloria, una humillación inesperada quebró la ilusión de perfección. Las risas crueles aún resonaban cuando ella, con el corazón hecho trizas, tomó una decisión impensada: aceptar la mano de un hombre al que todos despreciaban. Nadie imaginó que aquel gesto desesperado encendería el rumor de un secreto escondido, un pasado enterrado que podría elevarla o destruirla para siempre. Entre el deber que la encadena y el deseo que la llama, su elección podría cambiarlo todo. Si te gustan las historias intensas y llenas de giros, suscríbete al canal y ayúdanos a llegar a los primeros 1000 inscritos. Tu apoyo lo es todo. In the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, under chandeliers that dripped like frozen waterfalls, Emily Harrington stood at the altar of high society. Her gown, a cascade of ivory silk embroidered with seed pearls, hugged her slender frame, a masterpiece from Paris that whispered of dreams long nurtured in the shadowed halls of her family's brownstone on Fifth Avenue. At 22, with chestnut curls pinned beneath a veil of finest lace and eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, she was the picture of Gilded Age perfection. The air hummed with the scent of orchids and ambition, as New York's elite, magnates in tailored broadcloth suits, their wives adorned in ostrich feathers and diamond chokers, gathered to witness her union to Charles Vanderbilt, heir to a railroad fortune vast enough to span the continent. The organs swelled, a triumphant march that promised empires built on steel and steam. Emily's heart raced, not from joy alone, but from the weight of expectation. Her father, Elias Harrington, a steel baron whose mills belched smoke over Pittsburgh, had arranged it all. "This marriage secures our legacy, my dear," Adi, he had said that morning, his voice gravelly from years of shouting orders over clanging machinery. Her mother, frail in her corseted mourning weeds since the fever took her sister last winter, had merely nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But as the doors swung open and Charles stepped forward, his face pale beneath slicked-back hair, something fractured in the air. He halted midway down the aisle, his polished boots scuffing the crimson carpet. Whispers rippled like wind through dry leaves. "Emily," he said, his voice cracking like thin ice, I cannot." The words hung, heavy as lead. Gasps echoed off the marble walls. Charles's eyes darted to a figure in the shadows, a woman, perhaps, cloaked in mystery, but he offered no explanation. Only a hurried bow before fleeing into the night, leaving Emily alone under the gaze of 500 souls. Laughter erupted then, sharp and merciless, slicing through the stunned silence. "The jilted bride!" someone tittered from the Vanderbilt pew. "Harrington's empire crumbles before the cake is cut." Emily's cheeks burned, her gloved hands trembling as she clutched her bouquet of white roses, thorns pricking through the satin. Her father's face darkened like thunderclouds over the Alleghenies, and her mother's sobs joined the chorus of mockery. In that moment, the world she had known, balls at Delmonico's, summers in Newport, the whisper of silk on polished floors, shattered like fine crystal under a careless heel. She fled the altar, veil trailing like a fallen banner, bursting into the cool evening air of Manhattan. Carriages clattered by on gaslit streets, oblivious to her ruin. Tears blurred the spires of Trinity Church in the distance. How could she face the society pages tomorrow? The cartoons in Puck magazine would feast on this for months. Abandoned, humiliated, Emily wandered, her heels clicking against cobblestones slick with autumn rain. She sought refuge in a shadowed alley near the Bowery, where the elite never ventured, the air thick with the tang of coal smoke and unwashed hope. There, slumped against a crate in the dim flicker of a lantern, sat a man, ragged coat patched with burlap, trousers worn to threads, his face shadowed by a wool cap pulled low. He looked up, eyes sharp as a hawk's despite the grime, and extended a tin cup. "Spare a dime for a beggar, miss?" His voice was rough, but laced with an odd refinement, like velvet hidden under dust. Emily hesitated, her pride warring with despair. What did it matter now? She dropped a coin into his cup, but he caught her wrist gently, his touch warm and steady. "Not pity," he murmured. "Strength. You've more fire in you than that lot back there." She pulled away, but his words lingered, a spark in the gathering dark. Days blurred into a haze of seclusion. Her family whisked her to their estate up the Hudson, but the scandal followed like a spectre. Suitors vanished, invitations dried up. Desperate to escape the whispers, Emily slipped away one foggy morning, boarding a train to Chicago, where her aunt kept a modest home amid the stockyards' roar. There, in the city's underbelly, she encountered him again, the beggar from the alley. He called himself Jacob Ellis, a drifter with tales of lost fortunes and wandering rivers. Against all reason, drawn by his quiet intensity, she accepted his hand in a hasty ceremony at a clapboard chapel. The only witness, a kindly priest who asked no questions. Society howled with derision when word spread. "The fallen heiress weds a vagrant," headlines screamed from the Tribune. Her father disowned her in a fury of telegrams, but Jacob's eyes held secrets, depths that hinted at worlds beyond the rags. As they set out for the prairies of Illinois, Emily wondered if she had traded one cage for another or found the key to freedom. What secrets did this beggar hide, and could love bloom from such unlikely soil? If this tale has you hooked, hit that subscribe button now and drop a comment below. From which city and country are you watching? Your stories fuel the fire. Let's keep the adventure alive. Word count: 872. The prairie wind whipped across the endless sea of golden grass, carrying the sharp tang of earth turned fresh by the plough. Emily Ellis, once Harrington, now bound by a whispered vow in a Chicago chapel, stood on the sagging porch of their sod house, a humble rectangle of mud bricks and thatch that blended into the Illinois flatlands like a forgotten thought. At 22, her city finery had given way to a simple calico dress, its skirts practical for the dust, hemmed above the ankles to dodge the mud. No more Paris silks or pearl combs. Her chestnut hair, once piled in elegant chignons, now hung in loose braids, tied with a ribbon faded from the sun. The air hummed with the distant low of cattle and the ceaseless chirp of crickets, a far cry from the clatter of Fifth Avenue carriages. Jacob moved with quiet purpose across the yard, his broad shoulders straining against a flannel shirt mended at the elbows. Gone were the beggar's rags from that shadowed New York alley. He had traded them for homespun trousers and boots caked in loam, his wool cap replaced by a wide-brimmed hat that shaded eyes the color of deep river pools. Tall and lean, with calloused hands that spoke of labor rather than ledgers, he hefted an axe over one shoulder, splitting logs for the evening fire. "Supper's on soon," he called, his voice steady, carrying that refined lilt that still puzzled her, like a scholar disguised as a farmhand. Emily nodded, forcing a smile as she stirred a pot of cornmeal mush over the iron stove inside, the heat prickling her skin. Their days fell into a rhythm as unyielding as the horizon. Dawn broke with Jacob rising before the sun, tending the few acres they'd claimed under the Homestead Act, wrestling stubborn soil that yielded potatoes and beans only after endless toil. Emily learned the rituals of this new world, milking the cow at first light, her fingers aching from the unpracticed pull, churning butter in a wooden dasher until her arms burned, mending curtains from feed sacks under the flicker of a kerosene lamp. No servants here, no afternoon teas with silver service. Meals were simple: soda bread, salted pork from the smokehouse, wild greens foraged from the creek. Jacob spoke little of his past, only that he'd wandered from the Mississippi bottoms, chasing dreams that slipped like sand. "This land's honest," he'd say, wiping sweat from his brow. "It takes what you give, no more, no less." Yet in the quiet moments, Emily felt the pull of her old life like a thorn in her side. Letters arrived sporadically from her aunt in Chicago, filled with society clippings, the Vanderbilts hosting galas at their Newport cottage. Her former friends waltzing in gowns of taffeta and lace. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in bruised purples, Emily sat by the window, her needle pausing over a quilt square. Jacob joined her, his presence a solid warmth against the chill seeping through the walls. "You miss it, don't you?" he asked softly, tracing a finger along the scarred oak table they'd salvaged from a passing wagon train. She met his gaze, the firelight dancing in her storm-grey eyes. "The noise, the lights, yes, but the cages too. Father always said a woman's place was in alliance, not choice." Her voice cracked, memories flooding back, the laughter in the Waldorf ballroom, the sting of abandonment sharper than any thorn. Jacob's hand covered hers, rough yet gentle, sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Here, you're free to choose every dawn," he murmured. For the first time, she saw not pity in his eyes, but a shared weariness, a hint of burdens he carried alone. The community trickled in on Sundays, farmers and their wives gathering in a one-room schoolhouse for hymnals and sermons led by a circuit-riding preacher. Emily attended in her best sprigged muslin, a shawl draped over shoulders, still unaccustomed to the prairie bite. The women eyed her with cautious curiosity, whispers of the city bride who married a drifter. Mrs. Harlan, a stout matron with flour-dusted apron and a brooch of carved coral, offered a slice of pie after service, her voice kind but probing. "Heard you come from fine stock back east. What brings a lady like you to these parts?" Emily hesitated, cheeks warming. "A fresh start," she replied, glancing at Jacob across the room, where he mended a harness with the men. Their eyes met, a silent thread weaving between them amid the chatter of quilt patterns and crop yields. Etiquette here was etched in survival, not silver spoons. A firm handshake sealed deals at the general store in town, where bolts of gingham and tins of lard lined the shelves under a sign reading "Cash or Crops Only." Hierarchies existed, subtle as the lay of the land, landowners with teams of oxen lording over sharecroppers, the preacher holding sway over morals. Jacob navigated it with ease, bartering for seed corn with a nod and a story, his easy laugh drawing nods from grizzled veterans of the plains. Emily watched, learning the dance, curtsy to the banker's wife on market day, share recipes over well water, never speak of debts or doubts. But cracks appeared in the idyll. One afternoon, as Emily hung laundry on the line strung between two posts, a rider approached on a lathered horse, dust swirling in his wake. He was a telegraph boy from town, no older than 16, cap askew and satchel bulging. "Message for Mrs. Ellis," he panted, thrusting an envelope sealed with red wax. Her heart stuttered, her family's crest pressed into the wax, a Harrington eagle. She tore it open, hands trembling. The words blurred at first. "Return at once. Father ill. Society forgets, but blood does not. Elias." No warmth, only command. Jacob emerged from the field, axe still in hand, his face tightening as he read over her shoulder. "It's a trap," he said flatly, crumpling the paper. "They'll drag you back to that gilded prison." Emily stared at the horizon, where thunderheads gathered like unspoken regrets. The wind picked up, rattling the line, and in the distance a coyote's howl pierced the air, a lone cry echoing her own unease. That night, as stars wheeled overhead like scattered diamonds, Emily lay awake beside Jacob's steady breathing. The letter burned in her mind, a whisper of the world she'd fled. What if her father truly needed her? And what shadows in Jacob's past might unravel this fragile peace? As sleep evaded her, a soft knock echoed from the door, unexpected in the dead of night. Jacob stirred, reaching for the rifle propped by the bed. The knock came again, sharper this time, slicing through the sod house's thin walls like a knife through butter. Jacob slid from the bed, his bare feet silent on the packed dirt floor, rifle gripped tight in one hand. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears, the kerosene lamp's flame flickering shadows across the quilted coverlet. She clutched the bedsheet to her chest, the cool night air raising gooseflesh on her arms. Outside, the prairie stretched black and endless, broken only by the faint outline of cottonwoods along the creek. "Who's there?" Jacob called, his voice low and edged with steel, positioning himself by the door. No answer, just the creak of boots on the porch. He cracked the door an inch, shotgun barrel poking through. Moonlight caught a figure, tall, cloaked in a wool greatcoat dusted with road grime, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. The man raised gloved hands slowly, empty. "Easy, friend. Name's Harlan Tate, from the bank in Springfield. Got business with Mr. and Mrs. Ellis." Jacob's shoulders eased a fraction, but he didn't lower the rifle. "At this hour, business waits for dawn." Emily slipped from the bed, pulling on a woolen shawl over her nightgown, her bare feet padding across the cold floor. She peered over his shoulder, heart still racing. Harlan Tate. She'd heard the name at church, the circuit banker who rode the plains collecting notes and foreclosing dreams. What could bring him here, miles from town, under cover of night? The man tipped his hat, revealing a lined face weathered like old leather, eyes sharp under bushy brows. "Apologies for the intrusion. Rode hard from the railhead. This can't wait." He glanced past Jacob to Emily, his gaze lingering a beat too long. "Mrs. Ellis, ma'am. Words come from back east. Urgent." Jacob stepped aside reluctantly, gesturing him in with the rifle's muzzle. Tate entered, stomping mud from his boots, the scent of horse sweat and tobacco filling the cramped room. He pulled a leather folio from his coat, slapping it onto the table with a thud that rattled the tin cups. Emily lit another lamp, its glow pushing back the dark. She poured coffee from the pot still warm on the stove, hand steady despite the tremor in her gut. "Sit," she said, voice firmer than she felt. Tate nodded thanks, easing into a chair that groaned under his weight. Jacob leaned against the wall, rifle across his lap, watchful as a hawk. "Out with it," he said. Tate opened the folio, extracting a sheaf of papers yellowed with age, sealed with red wax, bearing the Harrington eagle. Emily's breath caught her father's mark. "Your pa, Elias Harrington, sent this by special courier. He's not well. Fever's got him bedridden in Pittsburgh, but it's more than that." He slid the documents across the table. "The family's in a bind. Steel tariffs from Washington are choking the mills. Debts piling like snowdrifts. Your marriage, well, it stirred the pot. Vanderbilts pulled their investments after the wedding scandal. Society's turned cold." Emily's fingers traced the seal, breaking it with a soft crack. The letter inside was in her father's spidery hand, ink blotched from haste. "Daughter," and it began, "blood calls to blood. Return to New York. Marry properly. Secure the alliance with the Astors. This prairie folly has cost us dear. Disownment stands, but forgive if you come home. Elias." No tenderness, just the iron of command. Enclosed were contracts, a betrothal agreement to Reginald Astor, heir to shipping fortunes, and a deed to the Harrington brownstone, hers if she complied. Her old life dangled like a lure. She looked up, cheeks flushing. "This is madness. I'm wed. To Jacob." Tate cleared his throat, eyes flicking to her husband. "Legally, yes, but out here, prairie vows are paper-thin without witnesses or registry. Back east, they say it's a runaway match, invalid. Your pa's lawyers in Chicago argue desertion. If you don't return, the family's fortune crumbles. And you, cut off forever. No inheritance, no name." Jacob's jaw tightened, knuckles whitening on the rifle. "She's no chattel to be traded. Tell Harrington to keep his steel and his schemes." But Emily felt the weight crash down, the isolation of the sod house suddenly suffocating, the prairie vast and unforgiving. Memories flooded, her mother's frail form, the mills her father built from nothing, the legacy she'd spurned in a haze of hurt pride. Refuse, and she'd be truly lost, a ghost in homespun. Accept and shatter the fragile bond with Jacob, this man who'd offered her freedom without chains. I need time, she whispered, folding the papers with trembling hands. Tate stood, adjusting his hat. Time's the one thing the banks don't give. Sign by week's end, or the deeds revert. Riders'll come for you if need be. He nodded curtly and stepped into the night, his horse whinnying as he mounted and vanished into the dark. Silence fell, thick as the mud outside. Jacob set the rifle down, crossing to her side. His hand on her shoulder was warm, grounding. Don't let him pull you back. This is your life now. But doubt gnawed at her. The community's eyes would turn if word spread. Whispers of the wayward bride, fleeing her duty, dragging Jacob into scandal. Already at market, she'd caught sidelong glances from the wives, their smiles tight as drawn corsets. Refusal meant poverty, exile from both worlds. Acceptance, a return to gilded bars, abandoning the spark she'd found in his gaze. Dawn broke grey and reluctant, painting the horizon in muted golds. Emily stood at the window, watching Jacob yoke the oxen for the fields, his broad back a silhouette against the rising sun. The papers burned in her apron pocket, a serpent coiled and waiting. That afternoon, as she walked to the creek for water, a neighbour's wagon passed, the driver, a weathered farmer named Grimes, calling out, "Heard from town, ma'am. Telegraph buzzin' about Eastern money. You leavin' us?" His words spread like prairie fire, allies fracturing before the blaze. The preacher might counsel duty, the women, loyalty to kin. Obstacles loomed, slander in the local gazette, veto from the land office on their homestead claim, debts Jacob hinted at from his wandering days, now twisted against them. By evening, Emily faced the mirror, a cracked shard from a peddler's cart, seeing not the city heiress, but a woman torn between roots and wings. Jacob found her there, his reflection joining hers. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you," he said, voice rough with unspoken fear. But as thunder rumbled distant, promising storm, she knew the decision would shatter their quiet world. A rider approached again at dusk, bearing another missive, this one from her aunt, pleading urgency. Emily's hand hovered over the pen, inkwell gleaming like fate's eye. To sign or burn, the choice would bind them or break them, thrusting her into a whirlwind where old alliances clashed with new vows, and secrets long buried threatened to rise like ghosts from the plain. The sun climbed high over the Illinois prairie, baking the earth into a cracked mosaic that stretched to the horizon. Emily's decision hung in the air like the dust from the rider's departing hooves, the aunt's missive clutched in her fist, a plea wrapped in velvet threats, urging her to honor family before folly. She burned it in the cook stove that evening, watching the flames devour the words, but the ashes settled heavy in her chest. Jacob said nothing, only nodded as he banked the fire, his silence a bridge over the chasm widening between them. Days passed in taut routine, ploughing, washing, the endless mending of fences both literal and unseen. Whispers from neighbours slithered in on the wind. Grimes at the well, his wife at church, eyes narrowing over hymnals. "Eastern blood calls strong," one murmured. Emily lifted her chin, stirring lye soap with vigour, but the isolation gnawed deeper than prairie roots. A week later, the community stirred with purpose. The annual harvest social loomed, a semi-public gathering in the town hall, a weathered frame building on the edge of Springfield, where farmers bartered yields and wives, traded patterns under the guise of quilt bees and potlucks. No grand ballrooms here, just oilcloth tables laden with cornbread, apple butter and venison pies, the air thick with pipe smoke and the tang of fermenting cider. Emily donned her sprigged muslin, the fabric starch stiff against the heat, a cameo brooch at her throat, the last remnant of her New York days, a gift from her mother, its carved shell depicting a serene maiden. Jacob hitched the mule to the wagon, his flannel shirt tucked neat, hat brim polished with a rag. "We'll face 'em together," he said, helping her up, his calloused palm lingering a moment on hers. A spark jumped there, unbidden, warming the chill of doubt. The hall buzzed like a hive as they arrived, wagons hitched in a ragged line under sycamores shedding yellow leaves. Inside, lanterns swung from rafters, casting golden pools on faces flushed from labor and laughter. Mrs. Harlan bustled forward, her coral brooch glinting, apron strings tied tight over a bombazine dress. "Mrs. Ellis, you've come. Bring your pie. Cornmeal, isn't it? Sits well with the menfolk." Her smile held edges, sharp as a scythe. Emily handed over the dish, her gloved fingers brushing the woman's rough ones. Around the room, eyes flicked their way, the preacher nodding benignly from his corner, Grimes leaning against a post with arms crossed, his wife whispering to a cluster of matrons in poke bonnets and shawls of faded wool. Jacob melted into the crowd, trading yarns with the farmers over a jug of cider, his laugh low and genuine, drawing nods from men who'd eyed him as an outsider. Emily hovered near the quilt frames, where bolts of calico unrolled like promises. The women circled her, needles flashing, voices weaving a net. "Heard from Chicago way," ventured a thin-lipped soul named Mrs. Pike, her grey hair scraped back under a cap, skirts patched at the hems. "Your kin's got deep pockets, they say, steel and such. Why tether to this dirt when silks await?" The words landed soft, but the implication stung, class friction bubbling like overboiled jam. Laughter tittered from the group, not cruel like New York's ballroom barbs, but probing, testing her mettle. Emily's cheeks heated, the cameo at her throat suddenly tight, a symbol of the world she'd fled now, mocking her in this simpler one. She straightened, threading her needle with deliberate calm. "Silks tear easy in the wind," she replied, her voice steady, eyes meeting each gaze. "This soil holds if you work it right." A murmur rippled, approval from some, skepticism from others. Mrs. Harlan chuckled, a rumble from her ample chest. "Spirited, ain't she, like that filly we broke last spring?" But beneath the jest, Emily caught the measure. Acceptance tentative, rejection lurking in sidelong glances. Across the room Jacob watched, his eyes locking on hers amid the din. He excused himself from the men, weaving through with 2 tin cups of cider, offering one to her with a subtle nod, a micro gesture of solidarity. His fingers brushing hers again, longer this time, a shared silence blooming between the chatter. They stepped outside for air, the porch creaking underfoot, the prairie night unfolding vast and star-strewn. "You held your own," Jacob murmured, leaning on the rail, his shoulder near enough to feel the heat. Emily sipped the cider, its tart bite grounding her. "They see the city in me still, like a stain." He turned, his face shadowed, river-deep eyes reflecting the lantern glow. "Or a light, don't dim it for them." The words hung intimate in the cooling air, a small advance, vulnerability cracking his quiet shell, her hand finding his arm in thanks, the touch electric yet chaste. But shadows stirred even here. As they re-entered, a stranger lingered by the door, a lean man in a city-cut coat too fine for these parts, his face half hidden under a bowler hat. He slipped a note into Grimes' hand, whispering low before vanishing into the dark. Antagonist's whisper, perhaps. Her father's reach extending like telegraph wire, or Vanderbilt's spies sniffing for weakness. Emily shivered, unaware. But Jacob's gaze sharpened, tracking the empty threshold. By night's end, as wagons rattled homeward, consequence bloomed visible. The local Gazette boy hawked papers at the gate, fresh off the press. Eastern heiress stirs prairie pot, rumors of riches and runaways. Whispers turned to open talk. the community's fragile weave tightening around her. Emily climbed into the wagon, the cameo brooch now a weight at her throat, its serene maiden mocking the storm brewing. Jacob flicked the reins, but tension coiled between them. Unspoken. What if the shadows closed in, pulling her back? And who was this watcher, weaving webs from afar? As the mule plodded into the night, a distant thunder rolled, promise of rain or ruin. Rain lashed the sod house like 1,000 angry whips, turning the prairie into a churning sea of mud that swallowed wagon wheels whole. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the walls, as if the sky itself raged against their fragile peace. Emily huddled by the iron stove, its embers casting flickering shadows across the room, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and boiling coffee. Outside, the storm had trapped them since midday. No fields to tend, no creek to fetch from, just the relentless howl sealing them in like prisoners in their own home. Jacob paced the narrow space, his boots leaving prints on the swept floor, broad shoulders tense under the wool shirt clinging to his frame from the earlier downpour. She watched him from the corner of her eye, the cameo brooch still pinned at her throat, a cool weight against her warmed skin. The harvest social's echoes lingered, the probing questions, the stranger's shadow, but here, in this enforced closeness, the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Storm's a beast," Jacob muttered, finally sinking onto the bench beside her, close enough that his knee brushed hers. Heat radiated from him, chasing the chill that had seeped through the cracks. Emily nodded, stirring the pot absently, her mind a whirl of doubts. The burned letters, the neighbours' stares, they pressed like the low ceiling above. He reached for the tin mug she offered, their fingers grazing, lingering a beat longer than necessity demanded. "Can't work in this," he said, sipping slow, eyes on the rain-streaked window. Silence stretched, broken only by the stove's pop and the wind's moan. Emily set the spoon down, turning to face him fully. His face, usually guarded, softened in the firelight, lines etched deeper from years she knew nothing of, a faint scar tracing his jaw like a whispered secret. "Tell me about before," she said softly, voice barely rising above the gale. "The wandering. Why the rags in New York?" Jacob's grip tightened on the mug, knuckles paling. He stared into the black liquid as if seeing ghosts there. "It wasn't always this." His words came halting, roughened by memory. "Grew up in Boston, son of a shipwright. Father built clippers that danced the Atlantic, fast as wind, loaded with cotton and dreams. I was to follow, learned the ropes young, hands blistered from tar and oakum." He paused, the thunder rumbling like a distant cannon. Emily leaned closer, drawn by the crack in his armor, her shawl slipping from one shoulder. "But the war came," he continued, voice dropping. 61. I enlisted, lied about my age, 18, but felt younger. Fought at Shiloh, mud and blood up to our knees, brothers falling like wheat under the scythe. Guilt clings, Emily. I survived when good men didn't, came home to find the yard empty. Father lost at sea, mother to fever in the blockade camps. The house foreclosed, debts from the war swallowing it whole. His eyes met hers then, raw and unguarded, the river depths swirling with old pain. Wandered west, chasing work on the rails, then the prairies. Beggar's guise kept questions away. Easier to take handouts than explain the hollow inside. Emily's throat tightened, tears pricking unbidden. She saw him anew, not the drifter, but a man hollowed by loss, duty's heavy yoke mirroring her own. Her hand moved of its own accord, covering his on the bench, the calluses rough against her palm. "I thought you free of it all," she whispered, "but we're both scarred. Father built his empire on steel, but it chained us, sisters lost to the mill's fevers, mother fading in black crepe. Charles's flight. It stripped me bare, left me laughing stock, yet here with you, I breathe." He turned his hand, lacing fingers with hers, the gesture simple, profound, a tacit vow in the storm's fury. Warmth bloomed between them, not fire but steady ember, shifting the air from tense to tender. Jacob's thumb traced her knuckles, eyes holding hers with a promise unspoken. Partnership, not possession. "You've strength I envy," he said, voice low. "City grace in prairie grit. We'll weather this together." For the first time, trust rooted deep, humanizing the space between, his grief a bridge to hers, no consummation, just the quiet forge of shared wounds. They rose as one, moving to the shelf where Emily kept her few treasures. She lifted a small leather-bound book, inherited from her grandmother, a volume of Emerson's essays, pages yellowed, spine cracked from countless readings. "This anchored me in New York," she said, opening it to a marked passage. "Self-reliance. Father scoffed, called it woman's folly." Jacob took it gently, his fingers brushing the cover as if it were fragile glass. He read aloud, voice steadying with each word. "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else." The storm outside seemed to hush, the words weaving intimacy, layers peeling back like onion skins. Her dreams of independence clashing with duty, his wanderlust born of survival. As the rain eased to a patter, a knock shattered the moment, sharp, insistent, cutting through the sod walls. Jacob released the book, grabbing the rifle from its hook, while Emily's heart stuttered. He cracked the door, wind gusting in with the scent of wet sage. A rider stood there, soaked to the bone, a sealed envelope clutched in gloved hand. "For Mrs. Ellis," the man gasped, water dripping from his oilskin coat. "From Pittsburgh. Urgent." He thrust it forward, eyes avoiding Jacob's glare, then mounted his horse and spurred away into the fading tempest. Emily broke the seal, her face paling as she scanned the lines. Her father's hand, weaker now, illness worsening, family fortunes teetering, a veiled threat of disinheritance unless she returned alone. The emotional tide crashed low, doubt flooding back, the fragile warmth chilling anew. Jacob read over her shoulder, jaw set hard. What envoy from the east would strike next, unraveling their hard-won bond? The letter's ink seemed to bleed under Emily's gaze, each word a barb sinking deeper into the fragile trust she'd begun to build. Elias Harrington's script wavered more than before, the fever's toll evident in the uneven lines. "The mills falter without alliance," it read. "Vanderbilt's shadow looms. Debts called in, properties seized. Return by the full moon, or watch our name crumble. No more pleas, Father." Enclosed was a bank draft for her passage east, crisp and cold as betrayal, and a notarized affidavit from Chicago lawyers declaring her prairie marriage null for lack of proper registry. Jacob crumpled it in his fist, the paper tearing like skin under claws. "Lies," he growled, tossing it into the dying fire. Flames licked it greedily, but the damage lingered, smoke curling like accusations. Emily sank onto the bench, the Emerson book forgotten on the table, its pages whispering of self-reliance, now mocked by reality. The storm had passed, leaving a dripping world outside, but inside turmoil brewed fiercer. "He won't stop," she murmured, voice hollow. Jacob knelt before her, hands on her knees, his eyes fierce. "Then we fight, together." But doubt gnawed. Her father's reach stretched like the railroads he envied, wires humming with influence from Pittsburgh to the plains. That night, sleep came fitful. Dreams tangled with ballroom laughter and prairie mud, Jacob's form a distant shadow. Dawn broke clear but brittle, the sun gilding the puddles into false gold. They rose early, chores a desperate anchor, Jacob mending the storm-torn fence, Emily drawing water from the creek, bucket sloshing against her hip. The cameo brooch caught the light as she bent, its serene maiden a cruel irony against her churning thoughts. Neighbours passed on horseback, nods cooler than before. The aunt's urgent plea no doubt twisted in retellings. By midday, a dust cloud heralded arrival, not a lone rider, but a delegation. 3 men on matched bays, liveried in Harrington steel grey, badges gleaming on their vests. Foremen from the mills, faces stern as anvils, led by a lawyer named Caldwell, thin and sharp-featured, spectacles perched on a hawkish nose. They reined in at the yard, horses snorting steam in the crisp air. Jacob straightened from the fence, wiping sweat from his brow, his axe leaning nearby like a silent sentinel. Emily emerged from the house, shawl clutched tight, heart pounding. "Mrs. Ellis," Caldwell called, dismounting with a flourish, his city boots unsuited to the muck. "Or should I say Miss Harrington? We've come on behalf of Elias Harrington. Urgent business." The other 2 hung back, one clutching a satchel, the other scanning the horizon as if measuring the land's worth. Jacob stepped forward, blocking the path. "State it plain. No games." Caldwell smirked, adjusting his cufflinks, gold, engraved with the family eagle. "Your union is under scrutiny. Mr. Harrington contests its validity. Witnesses lacking, no blood test. A drifter's vow. Courts in Illinois favor family claims." He pulled documents from his coat, unfurling them like a battle standard. Affidavits from the Chicago chapel priest, recanting under pressure of conscience, and ledgers showing Harrington debts tied to her desertion. Emily's stomach twisted, sabotage frontal and vicious, her father weaponizing law without chains. Just ink and influence. The words spilled out in the yard's harsh light. "Sign this," Caldwell pressed, offering a quill and a deed renouncing Jacob. "Secure your inheritance, the brownstone, shares in the mills, or lose it all to Vanderbilt's bids. Your mother's health wanes, she needs you. Lies laced with truth, her mother's frailty real, the rest a noose. Whispers from the road drew eyes. Grimes and his wife pausing their wagon, Mrs. Harlan peering from her porch a quarter-mile off. Public now, the attack laid bare, reputation fracturing like dry sod under hoof. Emily's voice rose, steady despite the quake. "I'm no pawn. This is my home." But Caldwell laughed, cold as Pittsburgh winter. "Home? This hovel? Society knows the truth. A jilted girl fleeing to rags. The Tribune prints it tomorrow. Heiress's folly ends in foreclosure." He gestured to the satchel man, who produced clippings, society pages twisted into scandal, cartoons depicting her as a prairie fool, Jacob a scheming beggar. The community watched, support ebbing. Grimes spat tobacco, shaking his head. Mrs. Harlan turned away. Loss tangible. The preacher's endorsement for their homestead claim withdrawn by noon. Neighbors pulling back on shared labors. Isolation closing like a sod wall. Jacob's face darkened, fists clenching. "Get off our land." But Caldwell held ground, eyes gleaming. "Refuse." And riders return with sheriffs, not for arrest, oh no, but to seize assets. Your claims tied to Harrington loans you never knew. A blow. Jacob's hinted debts from wandering days, twisted into complicity. Trust cracked. Emily glanced at him, questions blooming unasked. Was his past entangled? The moment sealed. No return to innocence. The prairie idol shattered, her status plummeting from wary wife to suspected fraud. The men mounted, dust swirling as they rode off, leaving echoes of their laughter. Emily whirled on Jacob, tears hot. "Did you know? The loans?" He recoiled, pain flashing. "Old debts paid in rail work. But this? It's him, pulling strings." Separation struck, not physical yet, but emotional. A chasm widening. She retreated to the house, slamming the door, the cameo brooch yanked free and hurled to the floor, cracking the shell. Isolation wrapped her like fog. Outside, Jacob stood alone, axe forgotten, as thunderheads gathered anew. By evening, the ultimatum landed, a telegram boy panting, "Comply or exile. Family demands severance." Jacob packed a satchel in silence, eyes hollow. I'll go. Give you space. His withdrawal cut deepest, exiling her heart to the empty plains. As he saddled the mule under starlight, Emily watched from the window. The broken brooch glinting like shattered vows. What frontal assault would follow, sealing their fracture forever? The first light of dawn pierced the sod house like a hesitant promise, gilding the cracked cameo on the floor where it lay shattered, its serene maiden split in two. Emily stirred from a night of fitful dreams, the air heavy with the scent of cooling ash from the stove. Jacob's satchel was gone from the hook by the door. His withdrawal had carved a hollow in the room deeper than any prairie wind. She rose, pulling on her calico dress, the fabric rough against skin, still raw from tears. Outside, the mule grazed alone, but Jacob was nowhere, his tracks leading toward the creek, perhaps seeking solitude in the willows. She stepped into the yard, the earth soft underfoot from the night's dew, and spotted it. His form slumped against a fence post, head bowed, the rifle across his knees like a forgotten duty. Relief flooded her, sharp and unexpected, mingling with the ache. "Jacob," she called softly, approaching slow. He looked up, eyes shadowed, the scar on his jaw stark in the morning light. No anger, just weariness, a man unmoored. Guilt etching lines deeper than the war had. "I couldn't leave," he said, voice rough. "Not really. But this, your father's poison. It's breaking us." Emily knelt beside him, the hem of her skirt pooling in the dirt. "Then let's uncover it, all of it." Her words surprised even her, agency rising like the sun, no longer the jilted bride or prairie novice, but a woman claiming her ground. They returned inside together, the door closing with a decisive thud. From her trunk, Emily pulled the family ledgers her aunt had slipped into her baggage during the hasty flight west, thick volumes bound in cracked leather, pages filled with Elias Harrington's meticulous script. Jacob fetched his own hidden cache, a worn diary from his rail days, tucked behind a loose sod brick. Its entries faded but telling. They pored over them by the window, sunlight spilling across the table like a reluctant ally. First, the ledgers, debts intertwined like barbed wire. Harrington steel tangled with Vanderbilt rails, loans for expansion secured by Emily's betrothal to Charles. But deeper, a manipulation. Elias had inflated figures, siphoning funds to cover personal gambles on Chicago speculations, gone sour. "He used me as collateral," Emily whispered, tracing a forged entry. All this time, the empire was a house of cards. Jacob's diary corroborated, as a rail surveyor incognito, he'd uncovered Vanderbilt ledgers showing bribes to Chicago lawyers, pressuring the chapel priest to recant their marriage. "Not just debts," Jacob said, his voice steadying. "A plot. Your father and Vanderbilt, old rivals, turned allies against us. They aimed to drag you back, nullify our vows, seize the Harrington assets through family reclamation." Proof mounted. A crumpled portrait slipped from the diary's pages. Jacob not in rags, but young and suited, beside a clipper ship in Boston Harbor, dated before the war. Testimony in faded newsprint from a survivor of Shiloh, praising Elias Ellis, the name he'd buried under wanderlust. No beggar, but a tycoon in hiding, heir to shipbuilding fortunes lost to war and fire, rebuilding quietly on the prairies with investments in land grants. Emily's breath caught. You weren't cold, it was duty, to heal alone, away from society's gaze. He nodded, and finding hers across the table, fingers interlacing, not passion's fire, but trust's quiet forge. Guilt kept me silent. Thought you'd see a fraud, but you make me want to claim it all. Hope peaked then, a fragile bloom. They rose, sealing the proofs in a fresh envelope, ledgers copied, portrait enclosed, diary excerpts notarized by the town clerk in secret haste. Emily penned a letter in her elegant hand, no plea but a pronouncement. "Father, your webs unravel, the debts exposed, the marriage true." I stand with Jacob Ellis, not as pawn but partner. Cease your schemes, or face the courts with this truth." She signed it boldly. Emily Ellis, the name a declaration. Jacob watched, pride softening his gaze, their shoulders brushing, a reapproximation contained, trust weaving stronger than vows. They rode to Springfield that afternoon, the wagon rattling over rutted roads, the envelope burning in her lap like a talisman. At the post office, a modest clapboard amid the bustle of merchants and farmers, Emily approached the counter alone, chin high. The clerk, a bespectacled man with ink-stained fingers, raised a brow at the Harrington seal she affixed. "To Pittsburgh," she said firmly. Word spread swift as telegraph sparks. Mrs. Harlan at the dry goods, overhearing, Grimes pausing his team. By evening, as they hitched outside the general store, the community's perception shifted. No longer the wayward Easterner, but a heroine unveiling shadows. Women nodded approval at church the next Sunday, the preacher citing truth's light in his sermon, eyes on her pew. Even Grimes tipped his hat. "Heard you're setting things right, ma'am. Backbone like that earns respect." But valleys plunged deep with each advance. Elias's response arrived 2 days later, a rider from the east, face grim, bearing a counter-missile, threats veiled in legalese, vowing to discredit the proofs as fabrications by a drifter. Vanderbilt's hand evident in attached clippings from New York papers, painting Jacob as a war deserter, Emily a deluded fool. Indignation surged. How dare they twist survival into shame, manipulate blood for gold? The public assault escalated, their homestead claim contested at the land office. Neighbors withdrawing shared tools under family pressure. Jacob's past debts called in full, riders circling like vultures, forcing him to sell the mule at half value. Yet Emily's agency held. She initiated a social counter, gathering the women at the schoolhouse for a truth circle, not a bee, but a forum where she read excerpts from the ledgers aloud, voices rising in outrage at the elder Harrington's greed. "He's no patriarch," she declared, "but a puppeteer preying on kin." Mrs. Harlan stood first, pounding the table. "Shame on such men!" Cheers echoed, the tide turning, alliances reformed, the preacher pledging testimony for their claim. Jacob joined at dusk, his presence bolstering her, a shared glance sparking hope amid the fray. The peak of fury built as Elias's envoy returned, demanding the originals in a midnight confrontation at the yard. "Burn them or lose everything," the man snarled, lantern jaw set. Emily faced him, Jacob at her side, rifle low but ready. "We've copies, and witnesses now." The envoy retreated, tail between legs, but his parting shot chilled. "The family summons you both to the Vanderbilt Assembly in Chicago, full moon. Refuse, and the storm breaks full." Danger loomed greater, the antagonists' web tightening, but their bond, forged in revelation, stood unyielding. As the rider vanished into the dusk, Emily turned to Jacob, hand in his, the horizon calling to confrontation. The full moon hung low over Chicago like a silver medallion, casting an ethereal glow on the grand facade of the Auditorium Theater. Gas lamps flickered along Michigan Avenue, their flames dancing in the chill autumn breeze that carried whispers of lake water and coal smoke. Carriages lined the curb, wheels gleaming under polished harnesses as the city's elite, magnates in swallowtail coats, ladies in bustled silks and feathered turbans, ascended the marble steps. This was Vanderbilt territory, a glittering assembly disguised as a benefit opera, where fortunes were sealed with a glance and alliances forged over champagne flutes. Emily Ellis stepped from the hired hack, her heart pounding like a locomotive, Jacob's hand firm at her elbow. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet, borrowed from a sympathetic dressmaker in Springfield, simple yet elegant, its high neckline modest, sleeves puffed at the shoulders, the skirt falling in soft folds without excess train. No jewels, just the repaired cameo at her throat, its cracked shell mended with care, symbol now of resilience. Jacob, transformed for the night, cut a striking figure in a borrowed broadcloth suit, the fabric straining across his broad chest, a crisp white shirt and silk cravat adding polish to his prairie-hardened frame. His hair, usually tousled under a hat, was combed back, revealing the strong lines of his face, the scar on his jaw, a badge of battles past. "We face them on our terms," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as they entered the foyer. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, illuminating frescoed walls and a throng buzzing with anticipation. The air hummed with the scent of perfume and fresh cigars, violins tuning in the auditorium beyond. They moved through the crowd like ships in fog, heads turning, whispers rippling, the prairie bride with that drifter. Emily's chin lifted, her storm-grey eyes scanning for the enemy. Elias Harrington sat in a prime box, gaunt and fever-flushed, flanked by Caldwell the lawyer and a Vanderbilt proxy, a portly man named Thorne, with mutton chops and a diamond stick-pin. Reginald Astor lounged nearby, his smirk sharp as a stiletto, the betrothal contract no doubt burning in his pocket. Charles Vanderbilt himself was absent, but his shadow loomed in every gilded detail. The opera commenced, a lavish production of Verdi's Aida, trumpets swelling as the curtain rose on Egyptian grandeur. But Emily's mind raced, the proofs tucked in Jacob's inner pocket. Copied ledgers, the portrait, witness affidavits from prairie folk who'd rallied. Halfway through the first act, as the soprano's aria peaked, a hush fell in the Harrington box. Caldwell rose, signaling an usher who dimmed the house lights further. Spotlights, rare novelties from Europe, swung to the center aisle, illuminating a figure ascending the stage stairs. A bought witness, the Chicago priest from their chapel wedding, his face pale under clerical robes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell boomed, his voice amplified by the theater's acoustics, "a scandal unfolds. This so-called Mrs. Ellis, Miss Harrington to true society, fled her duties for a vagrant's bed. Her union, a sham, as I shall prove." The priest stammered forward, clutching a dossier of forged documents. "The vows. Coerced, no true intent, invalid under canon law." Gasps echoed, laughter bubbling from the elite rows, sabotage final and vicious, a dossier of lies painting Emily as deceiver, Jacob as fraud. Thorne stood, waving a fake letter purportedly from Jacob, confessing debts and desertion. Elias leaned forward, eyes gleaming with triumph, the fever forgotten in malice. "My daughter returns to her place," he rasped. "The Astor Alliance restores our honor." The orchestra faltered, strings scraping discord. Emily's pulse thundered, the crowd's eyes pinning her like butterflies. Thorne's bought witness preened, but then chaos. A side door burst open, admitting Mrs. Harlan and Grimes, prairie allies in their Sunday best, faces set like flint. Behind them the circuit preacher, Bible in hand. Jacob rose in their row, striding to the stage with measured steps, Emily at his side, her hand in his, a defiant link. "Enough shadows," Jacob declared, voice carrying clear and strong, the refined Boston lilt cutting through the din. He withdrew the envelope, holding it aloft as gaslights flared back to life. "Truth, not tales," Emily added, her voice steady, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She stepped forward, the cameo glinting, and unfurled the ledgers on a prop table. "Father, your empire crumbles not from my choice, but your greed. Inflated debts, siphoned funds, Vanderbilt bribes exposed here in black ink." Gasps swelled anew as she read aloud, dates and figures damning, Elias's speculations, Thorne's complicity in pressuring the priest. The witness blanched, crumbling under Harlan's glare. "They paid me $200 to lie." Grimes thrust forward a sworn statement from the chapel's true ledger, the preacher nodding solemnly. "God sees perjury. This marriage stands pure." The theatre erupted, murmurs turning to outrage. Elias surged to his feet, face ashen, but Caldwell's smirk faded as Thorne paled, the dossier snatched and torn by a furious patron. "Thieves in our midst!" Someone shouted from the balconies. Ladies clutched pearls. Magnates whispered of lawsuits. Reginald Astor slunk back, his betrothal off a dust. Elias clutched the rail, wheezing, "Lies! All lies!" But the proofs mounted, intelligent and irrefutable. Social strategy turning the assembly against them. The conductor halted the opera, lights full blaze as the crowd reframed Emily, no longer the jilted fool, but a lioness unveiling corruption. Cheers rose, applause thundering for the prairie pair. Jacob's portrait passed hand to hand, Tycoon unmasked, hero reclaimed. Elias staggered, Caldwell supporting him as ushers cleared the box amid jeers. Thorne fled into the wings, Vanderbilt's proxy humiliated, the antagonist's web shredded in public view. Victory crashed like a wave, euphoric and cathartic, validating every tear, every doubt. The elite surged forward, hands extended, congratulations, invitations renewed. Emily turned to Jacob amid the roar, his eyes locking on hers, a tacit commitment blooming in the chaos. Hands clasped, foreheads nearly touching, a silent vow of equals, futures intertwined. If this triumph has your heart racing, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss another thrilling tale like this one. As the applause faded, a profound silence settled over the auditorium, broken only by the distant lap of Lake Michigan against the shore. Elias and his allies vanished into the night, their empire's cracks widening irreparably. Emily and Jacob slipped away through a side exit, the cool air a balm on flushed skin. In the quiet street, under the moon's watchful gaze, they paused, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. No words needed, the storm had passed, leaving only the steady rhythm of shared breath, a promise etched in the stars above. But whispers lingered. What remnants of the old guard might yet stir from the shadows? The carriage wheels clattered over Chicago's cobblestones, the gas lamps blurring into golden streaks as Emily and Jacob rode back to their modest boarding house on the city's edge. The night's triumph pulsed in her veins, a heady mix of relief and resolve. But the quiet between them held a deeper current. Unspoken plans taking shape like the first frost on prairie grass. Jacob's hand rested on hers, warm and sure, no longer the drifter's grip, but the steady hold of a partner. "It's over," he said softly, his voice carrying that refined edge sharpened by victory. "But what comes next?" Emily leaned against him, the emerald velvet of her gown whispering against the leather seats. The cameo's mended shell pressed lightly against her skin, a talisman of fractures healed. "We build," she replied, eyes on the passing spires. "On our terms." Dawn crept in as they arrived, painting the sky in soft pinks. Inside their room, with its simple four-poster bed and a single window overlooking the rail yards, they shed the borrowed finery. Jacob unclasped a small velvet pouch from his pocket, not from his hidden past, but purchased that afternoon from a discreet jeweler in Springfield. He knelt before her, the wooden floor creaking under his weight. "Emily," he began, his river-deep eyes locking on hers, "no empires forced us here, no debts or duties, just choice. Will you wear this as my equal in all that follows?" He opened the pouch to reveal a plain gold band, unadorned, forged fresh without the weight of old fortunes. No heirlooms tainted by war or steel. She extended her hand, tears glistening but unshed, and he slipped it on, the metal cool at first, then warming to her skin. Their fingers intertwined, sealing the vow in silence, a ritual born of freedom, not obligation. She drew him up, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling in the morning light. No grand kiss yet, just the profound intimacy of survivors claiming their dawn. Word of the theatre confrontation spread like wildfire through telegraph wires and society columns. By noon, lawyers swarmed the Harrington interests in Pittsburgh. Elias, confined to his bed by the fever that now seemed a fitting scourge, faced the unraveling. The ledgers Emily had exposed, copied and dispatched to federal auditors in Washington, triggered investigations into tariff evasions and fraudulent loans. Vanderbilt's proxy, Thorne, fled to Europe on a steamer bound for London, his diamond stickpin pawned to cover mounting legal fees. Charles Vanderbilt himself, the jilted groom turned puppet master, saw his railroad shares plummet as partners withdrew, citing moral taint. Elias's empire fractured, mills shuttered, the Fifth Avenue brownstone seized by creditors, his name synonymous with scandal in the pages of Harper's Weekly. But justice tempered with mercy marked their path. Emily penned a final letter to her father, delivered by courier that week. "Blood binds, but truth frees," she wrote in her steady hand. "Seek healing, not conquest. The doors close, but forgiveness waits if you lay down the schemes." No reply came, but whispers reached them. Elias, broken and exiled to a quiet estate in the Alleghenies, signed over residual rights to the prairies, land grants that bolstered Jacob's quiet investments. Caldwell, the hawkish lawyer, faced disbarment, his practice crumbling under perjury charges. Reginald Astor, ever the opportunist, pivoted to safer alliances, his smirk replaced by wary distance. Allies bloomed in the aftermath. Mrs. Harlan and Grimes returned to Springfield triumphant, their testimonies earning them stakes in a community co-op Jacob funded from his shipyard residuals, now revealed as vast holdings in Boston, shipping rebuilt through anonymous proxies. The circuit preacher, once neutral, repositioned as their advocate, preaching sermons on honest toil over gilded lies that drew crowds to the schoolhouse. Emily's aunt in Chicago, long a silent bridge, visited unannounced one crisp afternoon, her frail form wrapped in a woolen cloak. "You were right to run," she confessed over tea in the boarding-house parlor, tears tracing lines on her powdered cheeks. "Your mother's last words were of pride in your fire." She gifted a trunk of family linens, untainted and stayed to help plan. Transformation shone in their every step. Jacob, unshadowed by guilt, spoke now with a leader's voice, organizing rail workers in Chicago for fair wages, his Boston lilt commanding respect in union halls lined with lanterns and ledgers. Emily's compassion deepened. No longer the sheltered heiress, she channeled her voice into legacy. With Jacob's backing, they founded the Harrington Ellis School for Prairie Daughters, a modest brick building on the Illinois edge, where girls from sod houses learned not just letters and arithmetic, but self-reliance from Emerson's pages, read aloud under wide windows. No steel-barred gates, open doors welcomed all, funded by auctioned Vanderbilt artifacts seized in court. Emily led the first class herself, her storm-grey eyes alight as she declared, "Knowledge is no cage, it's wings." Their new equilibrium settled like prairie soil after rain. They returned west by train, the rhythmic clack a symphony of progress, settling into a frame house Jacob had built on their homestead claim, white-clappered with a wraparound porch overlooking fields now yielding golden wheat. Mornings found them walking the furrows, hands linked, discussing expansions, a library wing for the school perhaps, or scholarships for war widows' sons. Evenings brought quiet rituals, reading by kerosene light, her head on his shoulder, the gold band catching the flame. One sunset, as the horizon burned orange, they stood on the porch, the wind carrying children's laughter from the distant school. Jacob turned to her, cupping her face gently. "Queen of this world," he murmured, and leaned in. Their lips met then, soft, unhurried, born of love's quiet triumph, sealing the horizon of their future. Fields stretched endless, legacy in every furrow, but a soft knock echoed from the road. A courier with a sealed envelope, bearing an unfamiliar crest, What new chapter whispered on the wind? 10 years had woven their quiet magic over the Illinois prairies, turning the endless gold of wheat fields into a tapestry of memory and growth. The frame house that Jacob and Emily Ellis had claimed as their own now stood sturdy and expanded, its white clapboard walls weathered to a soft patina by sun and storm. A wide porch wrapped around it like an embrace, where rocking chairs creaked under the weight of evenings spent watching sunsets bleed into the horizon. Vines of wild clematis climbed the posts, their purple blooms a nod to the untamed spirit that had drawn them here. Inside, the rooms echoed with life, polished oak floors scattered with rag rugs, shelves lined with books from Emerson to Audubon, and the faint scent of fresh-baked bread mingling with the earthiness of the land beyond. Emily, at 32, moved through the kitchen with the grace of one who had tamed both city ballrooms and frontier hearths. Her chestnut hair, streaked now with threads of silver from worries weathered and joys embraced, was pinned loosely in a practical chignon, a few curls escaping to frame her face. The lines around her storm-grey eyes spoke of laughter shared and tears shed, but her posture remained straight, unbowed by the decade's trials. She wore a simple gown of indigo wool, its bodice fitted with pearl buttons, skirts practical for the garden, but edged with the subtle lace of her enduring elegance. The mended cameo brooch still graced her throat, its cracked shell a badge of resilience, polished daily as if to affirm the fractures that had forged her stronger. Jacob emerged from the fields, his broad frame filling the doorway, hat in hand, and sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded from years of honest toil. At 40, the war's scar on his jaw had faded to a faint line, but his river-deep eyes held the same quiet intensity, deepened now by fatherhood and the quiet empire he had rebuilt, not in steel or rails, but in land and legacy. His suit from that fateful Chicago night hung in the attic, replaced by flannel shirts and trousers mended at the knees, yet his movements carried the refined poise of the shipwright's son he had reclaimed. "Supper smells like heaven," he said, his voice warm as the hearth fire, crossing to press a kiss to her temple. Their hands brushed, a familiar spark, undimmed by time, speaking of love that had rooted deep and bloomed eternal. 2 children bounded in behind him, their laughter chasing the dust from their boots. Young Elias, named for the grandfather whose shadow had once loomed so dark, but now served as cautionary tale, was 8, with Jacob's sturdy build and Emily's keen gaze. He clutched a slingshot fashioned from willow, pockets bulging with smooth stones gathered from the creek. Beside him trailed little Grace, 5, her braids flying like banners, dress smudged from chasing butterflies in the yard. "Papa caught a rabbit," Elias crowed, holding up a snare triumphantly. Grace tugged at Emily's skirt. "Mama, read the prairie book again, the one with the big storms." Emily knelt, drawing them close, her arms a circle of safety. "After pie," she promised, her voice rich with the affection that had sustained them through lean harvests and whispered doubts. The family gathered at the oak table, now scarred from years of meals and mended with care, plates heaped with venison stew, cornbread golden from the oven, and apples from the orchard they'd planted in the first spring after Chicago. As they ate, stories flowed, Elias recounting his adventure with the neighborhood boys, building a fort from sod bricks like the house of old. Grace giggling over a doll fashioned from corn husks, its calico dress a gift from Mrs. Harlan, who had become aunt in all but blood. Jacob's eyes met Emily's across the candlelight, a silent toast to the life they'd carved. Their marriage, once contested and fragile, had solidified into something unbreakable. Vows renewed not in chapels or courts, but in the daily dance of partnership, where his steady hand balanced her fire and her compassion tempered his guarded heart. But the epilogue of their tale carried shadows too, etched in the quiet corners of memory. Elias Harrington, the steel baron who had once wielded family like a weapon, had paid the highest price. The scandals of that moonlit night in Chicago unraveled his empire thread by thread. Mills closed under federal scrutiny. The brownstone sold to satisfy debts that ballooned like unchecked weeds. Exiled to a modest cottage in the Alleghenies, he lingered 5 years more, his fever breaking only in death. Whispers reached the prairies. On his deathbed, he had murmured regrets, a single letter arriving for Emily, unopened at first, then read in the privacy of their bedroom. "Forgive the chains I forged," it pleaded in fading ink. She had wept then, not for the man, but for the father lost to ambition, burning the paper in the stove as a final release. Her mother, frail to the end, had passed quietly 2 years prior, her last days eased by funds Emily sent anonymously, a bridge mended without fanfare. Charles Vanderbilt and his ilk fared little better. The railroad heir, exposed as the schemer behind the bribes, saw his fortunes fracture under lawsuits and boycotts from partners scorning his duplicity. He retreated to a diminished estate in Newport, his galas replaced by solitude, the laughter of society pages turning to pitying footnotes. Reginald Astor wed elsewhere, his alliances soured by the taint, forever marked as the fool who chased a ghost. Thorne, the proxy, vanished into obscurity in Europe, his diamonds long pawned. Even Caldwell, the sharp lawyer, ended disbarred and destitute, peddling legal scraps in back alleys until drink claimed him. Yet light prevailed in the changes that rippled outward. The Harrington Ellis School had flourished, its brick walls now sheltering 24 girls each term, their voices rising in recitations of poetry and arithmetic under wide eaves that let in the prairie breeze. Emily led assemblies still, her presence a beacon, teaching not just letters, but the courage to choose one's path. Graduates scattered like seeds, some to Chicago universities, others to homesteads of their own, carrying Emerson's words like lanterns. Jacob's quiet Tycoon status, revealed in full after the victory, funded expansions. A library wing stocked with volumes on navigation and botany, scholarships for war orphans echoing his own lost youth. The community that once whispered now celebrated them. Annual harvest festivals honoring the Prairie Queen and her captain, with toasts raised in cider mugs under strung lanterns. Social shifts whispered of broader tides. Women's voices grew bolder in town halls, inspired by Emily's stand. Land claims for families like Grimes's strengthened against Eastern speculators. The children knew fragments of the old tales, Grandpa Harrington's big mistakes, Papa's hidden ships, but lived in the warmth of the new, unscarred by chains. As supper ended, the family stepped onto the porch, the sky a dome of fading stars. Elias and Grace chased fireflies in the yard, their squeals mingling with the cricket's song. Jacob drew Emily close, his arm around her waist, chin resting on her head. 10 years, he murmured, voice thick with nostalgia, and every dawn still feels like victory. She turned in his embrace, the gold band on her finger catching the moonlight, their love a flame that time had only fanned higher, resilient, profound, a queen's reign shared with her equal. Grace ran up, clutching a glowing jar. "Look, Mama, stars in a bottle." Emily laughed, the sound pure and free, echoing across the fields that stretched toward tomorrow. In that moment, the past's ghosts faded entirely, leaving only the steady beat of hearts entwined, legacies blooming under the vast prairie sky. As the prairie stars wheeled overhead that nostalgic evening, Emily and Jacob lingered on the porch, the children's laughter fading into the soft hush of night. The jar of fireflies glowed in Grace's small hands like captured dreams, a simple wonder that mirrored the life they had woven from the threads of hardship and hope. Emily leaned into Jacob's side, her head finding its familiar place against his shoulder, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, a rhythm as constant as the seasons. 10 years had not dulled the spark between them. If anything, time had polished it to a warm, enduring light, proof that love, when chosen freely, could outlast empires built on sand. In the quiet, Emily reflected on the lessons etched into their story, a tale of gilded cages shattered and true freedom claimed. First, she knew, came the fire of self-reliance, the courage to walk away from the clamor of high society, from ballrooms echoing with hollow laughter, and embrace the raw honesty of the land. "We learned," she might whisper to the wind, "that worth isn't measured in steel mills or railroad shares, but in the choices that honor the heart." Jacob would nod, his calloused hand squeezing hers, adding his own truth. Resilience, born of shared burdens, where guilt and grief could forge bonds stronger than any contract. Their journey taught that villains like Elias, blinded by ambition, wielding family as weapons, paid dearly, their legacies crumbling under the weight of deceit, while those who stood in truth rose unbowed. And oh, the power of unlikely alliances, from prairie neighbors who turned whispers to cheers, to the quiet revolution in their school, where young girls now lifted voices once silenced by expectation. Emily saw it in Elias's earnest questions about the old ships of his father's youth, in Grace's fearless chase through the fields, no more the heiress's poise forced upon her, but a wild spirit nurtured to soar. Society, too, had shifted in subtle waves, women's clubs sprouting in Chicago, inspired by tales of the Prairie Queen, demanding seats at tables long denied them. Jacob's hidden tycoon heart, revealed not in rags, but in quiet philanthropy, funded libraries where Emerson's words ignited minds across the heartland. Their love, tested in storms of scandal and separation, emerged as the greatest lesson. True partnership thrives not on possession, but on mutual fire, turning beggars into kings and jilted brides into queens of their own realms. Yet the epilogue's glow carried a gentle warning, a reminder that shadows linger even in triumph. Elias's final letter, though burned, echoed in dreams, a father's regret too late to mend, a caution against letting duty devour the soul. Vanderbilt's fall, from railroad lord to faded footnote, underscored the fragility of fortunes chased without conscience. Emily and Jacob had paid their price too. Nights of doubt in the sod house, the ache of isolation before allies gathered. But from those valleys rose peaks of joy, the children's first steps, harvests bountiful under their hands, anniversaries marked not with diamonds, but with walks along the creek where they first dreamed aloud. As the family finally turned indoors, the door closing softly behind them, Emily paused at the threshold, gazing back at the endless plain. This was their victory, not a grand finale, but a life richly lived, triumphant in its everyday grace. And you, dear listener, carried through this whirlwind of emotion. What threads of their tale resonate in your own heart? Did Emily's bold stand stir your spirit, or Jacob's hidden depths touch a chord of hidden strength? Share in the comments below. What did you think of this Gilded Age saga? From the shattering jilting to the prairie's enduring embrace. To prove you've journeyed to the very end and help spread this story's fire, write the word prairie in your reply. Let's see how far our shared adventure reaches. If their resilience inspires you, dive into more tales of triumph over adversity waiting in the cards above. Like a spark in the night, your engagement keeps these stories alive. Subscribe, comment, and let's weave more legends together until the next horizon calls.